Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. If you are out in the lobby area, please go ahead and make your way into the sanctuary. I want to welcome everyone here to Grace First. If this is first time for you and you're new with us, we are an evangelical free church. And this local church body is devoted to the Word of God, and we're committed to unapologetically preaching the whole counsel of God. Augustine once said, "In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity." And this is one of the ethos of the evangelical free church. One of the key tenets of the free church is that we're united in the essential doctrines which are essential to the Christian faith. And we exercise Christian liberty in the doctrines which allow room for different views. For example, when it comes to the timeline of the Christ's return or the age of the earth, we here at Grace First consider these doctrines as non-essential to our salvation. But that doesn't mean that they're non-essential to the Christian faith. Even though the age of the earth may just be one aspect of the doctrine of creation, it doesn't mean that it's not an important doctrine. We consider all these doctrines to be an integral part of the Christian discipleship. So today, we are excited to host a Creation Ministries Institute where we'll be able to reason together. And we pray that this seminar will help you in three areas. One, to help dispel certain evolutionary theories which are viewed as fact in our world today. Two, to help you gain a better understanding of a worldview that is grounded in a solar day creationism, that is a young earth position in the doctrine of creation, and that's whether or not you hold to the young earth or an old earth. And finally, we pray that you would walk away from the seminar with a greater confidence in the gospel truth, that what is written in the pages of Scripture in the Bible is trustworthy, and that this would lead us to your humble walk with Jesus Christ. So with that, let me open our time up in a word of prayer. O Lord, you are the creator of heaven and earth, and all creation declares your glory. We're thankful that you have revealed yourself to us through the pages of the Scripture, and you have made yourself known as the loving creator and king. You have redeemed a people for yourself through Jesus Christ our Lord. We pray that as we now enter into a time of learning to be equipped for our walk with you, we ask that you give us understanding, that we may not be puffed up in our knowledge to be boastful in our understanding, but that we'd be equipped to serve you humbly and share Christ more confidently with others. For you are the only way, the truth, and the life. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I want to invite Ron Frere up. He and Jennifer Herring, who you saw at the book booth out front, they've been the main orchestrators of this, the movers and shakers who put this together. So if you see them, give them a thanks, and just want to give a quick round of applause for all their hard work.
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to the Grace First Creation Ministries International Creation Seminar. I'll be introducing our speaker today, Dr. Jeffrey Benjamin. Dr. Benjamin was saved in his late 20s after determining that the Genesis account of creation could not be reconciled with the theory of evolution. He began to wrestle with these two worldviews after a guest speaker in a university class provided a critique of evolution. The presenter challenged Jeff's way of thinking about things like how fossils are made, the lack of transitional fossils, and how rock ages are determined. After reading creation science books such as CMI's Refuting Evolution and articles, Jeff was eventually convinced that the Genesis account was historically true. This then led him to consider the truth of the Bible in its entirety, which resulted in him recognizing his need of salvation. Dr. Benjamin has earned a Bachelor of Science in Forest Engineering from the University of New Brunswick in Canada in 1997 after working in British Columbia for 5 years preparing geometric road designs and conceptual bridge designs for industry clients. He went back to the University of New Brunswick to obtain a PhD in forestry. He successfully completed the program in 2006 with a dissertation on lumber quality and knot characteristics in black spruce trees. Jeff then served 9 years as the forest operations professor at the University of Maine before serving 6 years at a local church and an affiliated Christian school in various roles, including head of school and executive administrator. Dr. Benjamin is currently an associate speaker for CMI. He continues to live in Maine and works for a local IT company as a business analyst and director of professional development. So please give a welcome to our speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Benjamin.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, it's good to see you guys all here. On a summer day, you guys chose to come here. All right. Well, this should be fun. I think because you're here on a beautiful summer day, I'm pretty sure I know the answers to my first questions. I'm just going to kind of get a head nod and we can jump in. But the first question is, do you want to grow in your faith? Yes. I know that because it's such a nice day, and I'm still a little overwhelmed with how many actually decided to come out. Now, maybe the temperature rose up enough that it's cooler in here than other options you had available. So you want to grow in your faith. That is good. Now, here's the next one, and it is okay to say these answers out loud, too. Sometimes I go to churches in Maine, and I'm very stoic, and I ask a question, it's silence. I'm okay with a little bit of vocalness. Do you want your children and grandchildren to be followers of Christ when they become adults? Absolutely. That one always, even in some of the rural churches in Maine, always gets at least one audible response. So my answer to those questions is yes as well. I want the same for my family. I want the same for me. And that's why this afternoon, the key verse, the key thing I want us all to do is to put Mark 12:30 into practice. So we're all familiar with this verse. Basically, love God with your whole being. Worship him with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But I've highlighted the mind piece here, and I'm challenging everyone to engage their mind as a form of worship this afternoon. When I became a Christian, I tended to think, some of my friends thought that when I entered the church, I left my brain at the door, and I didn't think at all. And this verse really helped me understand that we can engage our mind by asking questions and seeking answers that are fundamental to our faith. So it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to have doubts. It's kind of what you do with them and how you seek the answers that is the important piece. So as we go through this, I also want to highlight that, as the Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians 10:5, we are out to destroy arguments, not people. Okay? Destroy arguments in every lofty opinion, and evolution is one of those lofty opinions that is raised against the knowledge of God, and we're to take every thought captive to obey Christ. But we're to destroy the argument and focus on the topic, not the person that might believe it. That's really important, right? We're not here to tear down people, and learning about this is not about that. It's not who's right, who's wrong. It's about looking at the information and studying the Bible and coming to a belief in it. So, with that being said, those are the two backdrops for this first presentation. How many of you have either asked yourself, or have asked questions like this, or have had someone ask you questions like these? Did dinosaurs and humans exist at the same time? How did all the animals fit on the ark? Did God use evolution to create the world and us? Did he literally make the universe and everything in it in just 6 days? Hasn't science proven evolution to be true? Or maybe a really simple one, like, how are fossils made? So have you asked questions like that, or have had someone ask you? And if you have, just put your hand up and keep it up just for a second. Now look around. All right, these are common questions. Thanks. You can put your hands down now. Very common questions, and there's hundreds more just like it. At CMI, our goal is to provide you with credible answers that affirm the Bible, with particular emphasis on Genesis. That's what we do. But I can't answer all of those questions this afternoon. I can't answer all the questions that you might have. So really, this afternoon, what I want to do is show you where and how you can find answers to these questions. Because it's important one, ask them, but then to seek the answers and settle it out. And one of my colleagues, Dr. Rob Carter, always says, don't settle for a lame answer. Dig at it. It takes a little bit of work. There's lots of resources out there. And so this day and age, when you have a question and you're looking for an answer, what's the first place you go to? What do? Google it. It used to be you go to the library, but I'm dating myself. You Google it, okay? I don't want you to Google the answers to these questions. You're going to get a different response. But I do want you to use the internet. I want you to go to our website, creation.com. So if anything that I say this afternoon, sparks an interest, sparks another question, write it down. You hear something in the news this week that goes against what you know to be true from the Bible or what you are taught every week here at church, go to creation.com and type that question in the search bar at the top of the page. And chances are, one of the more than 15,500 free articles and videos will probably already answer that question, or at least point you in the right path. And if for some reason it doesn't, you've spent 15, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, and you cannot find anything to help you along the way with that answer, send us an email. We've got a group of full-time staff that will gladly receive that, give you a response, point you in the direction, and maybe you've asked a question that no one has before and it ends up as an article or a chapter in a book, or maybe it ends up as a book at some point. That's what we want you to do. So remember creation.com as the first place to go for answers to questions like these. And it's important to remember that, to know that, to be familiar with it, because you're going to be asked questions from your loved ones. You're going to be asked questions about this topic from your kids, from your grandkids. It might follow something like this silly cartoon. Hey, what'd you learn at school today? And the son says, oh, it was really interesting, Dad. We learned that humans evolved from ape-like creatures millions of years ago. Isn't that amazing? Now, we can kind of laugh. We know inside this wall, it's safe to say, no, of course that's not true. But how the cartoon dad has a deer in the headlights look. He doesn't know how to answer it. He knows it's not true, but he doesn't know how to answer it. So fast forward a week from now, and you're asked the same question by somebody. Do you know what you would say? How would you respond? The Bible tells us in 1 Peter 3:15 that we need to be prepared. 1 Peter 3:15, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. So the reason we do this is we're setting him apart as Lord. And then it says, when you feel like it, be prepared. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Always be prepared. It's not an option. It's not when you have the perfect answer. It's not when you have time. It's not when you feel like it. We need to always be prepared. Now, this verse is not explicitly talking about creation and evolution questions, but part of the reason for the hope that we have is because God created everything. So it's part of it. Now, that last piece, gentleness and respect, you've already heard me slip in, and I actually didn't intend to, but it's in my nature. Maybe I'm the only one here that's cursed with the unspiritual gift of sarcasm. Okay, maybe if I am, I'm just going to apologize right up front. I do my best not to, but it slips in sometimes, and I have to remember this second part of the verse. And if you are blessed with that unspiritual gift as well, you know what I mean. You can give a flippant answer to someone and turn them off really quick. Or someone can overhear you say that to someone else. And even if that person isn't offended, the other one might be. So gentleness and respect. We're not to tear down people with this information and discussion. We're supposed to respond with gentleness and respect. So that's my prayer always when I start, that even though I know sometimes it's going to slip in, I hope it still lands the way that I intend, okay? So I've already shared one way that you can be prepared. What's the website to go to? You guys are sharp. Okay. The second way is to sign up for our free email newsletter. And I'm going to ask the ushers to come and pass out some sign-up sheets. If you're willing, to give me your name, email address, and zip code, once every couple weeks, you'll get an email with 5, 6, 7 different articles that address questions like the ones we put up at the very beginning or discuss at the very beginning. It's free of charge. I'm not going to fill your inbox with spam. We're not going to sell your information. It's just another opportunity to receive information about these topics. And while those are being passed out, let me give you some examples of what the info bites look like. Here's one that the title says, "A swimming school of fish was fossilized in real time." So what does it take to simultaneously fossilize 257 fish while they're swimming in formation? Does that sound like something that would happen rapidly, or those fish are going to pose there for thousands of years and wait to be buried? Rapid burial is really key to what we see, especially the detail of what we see in the fossil record. Does anybody know of an account in the Bible where there was a lot of water over a little bit of time with a lot of sedimentation and erosion? Noah's flood explains the detail and the vast amount of fossils that we have in the fossil record. Or maybe this one, has life evolved to not evolve anymore? Evolution is not as straightforward as our science textbooks make it out to be. And recent research has shown that some organisms resist the very genetic changes that would be required if evolution was even true. Sometimes they're culturally relevant as well as scientifically relevant. We've all heard of artificial intelligence. Well, how are we as Christians to interact with that and engage with it? What does it mean for us from a biblical perspective? Here's another one. Shocking worldview statistics are a wake-up call for Christian parents. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this one further in the presentation. But as I said, some of our info bites are culturally relevant as well as scientifically relevant. And then the main topic for this presentation, did God create over billions of years? And does it even matter? Why should we care? So, foundational questions and answers, and the info bites can help provide you answers to those types of questions. So if we go back to our father-son discussion, what's the next stage of life for this young boy? What's he turn into next? What's that? Yes, and it's funny. I'm not joking at all. This is, every time I ask that question, I get a couple of chuckles and silence. It's like we're even afraid to say the word teenager. I have my oldest daughter got married, and I have twins that are 17, so they're in their senior year. I totally get the whole thing. But that's right. What happens to the next, or what do they turn into? They turn into teenagers. And what is happening to the teens in our church across the country? There's been all kinds of studies on this over the years. This particular study, even though it's about 20 years old, is still valid, and the numbers, more than likely, if I was to take a bet on it, the numbers have only gotten worse. 2/3 of teens intend to walk away from their faith when they leave home. They say, church didn't have any answers. I believe in science, not the Bible. I don't want it to happen to any teens associated with this church. I don't want it to happen to my kids. But there are answers. It just takes some time to learn them. And if 2/3 intending to walk away is bad enough, they're successful at it. 70% in this study did walk away. When they, quote unquote, got out of mom and dad's home, they did leave. They said Christianity was irrelevant, uninspiring, and it was just a phase. I went because I had to. You may know someone that's happened to, because we actually hear about it quite often in these events. And this is the slide that covers that previous info bite, talking about the worldview of Christian parents. So new research, this is only a couple of years old, from the American Worldview Inventory, 2022. It was conducted by the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. They showed three things, or many things, but the three I'm going to highlight. The first one is that 2/3 of the survey participants claim to be Christian. And you might think, well, that's pretty good. But more than 9 out of 10 parents of children under the age of 13 have what I would call a muddled worldview. They're grabbing some things from Christianity, a lot of stuff from materialism and the world, probably some stuff from New Age and mysticism, and they're just mashing it all together. And so they have a muddled worldview. And that means from this particular study, they found or concluded that only 2% of preteen parents actually have a biblical worldview. So if mom and dad don't believe it, what hope and chance and choice do the kids have? It really is an issue that we all have to be prepared for, and it starts in the home. So a number of years ago, CMI visited college campuses to find out why students were walking away from their faith. And they asked 4 simple questions. As students were walking by outside, they said, "Were you raised in the church?" If they said no, they just let them keep going because they wanted to know what was happening with those that did say they were raised in the church. They ended up with about 100 students that said, "Yeah, I was raised in the church." So then they asked, which is true, creation or evolution? And of that 100, only 5 said that creation was true. So then they asked, were you taught creation as you were growing up? All 5 that still believed in biblical creation were taught and shown how science fits with the Bible. They were taught and shown how creation is true, not just the cartoon image from the nursery. And every one of the students who believed in evolution said that they had never learned or heard the information of science fits with the Bible. And these are all kids that grew up going to church. Some even laughed, "Well, what information are you talking about?" So then the last question with all of them was, do you still attend church? All 5 of those that said they believe in creation still attend church, and one of the other ones. Okay. Sobering kind of look at things. The take-home message in this is that families that teach and discuss this topic and this issue in the home are raising kids that are stronger in their faith. That's it. Now, it's kind of sobering for parents, like, well, now what do I do? Well, how do you reach the children in your circle of influence, in your home or in your life? The first thing we have to understand is that it's going to take an alternative answer to their questions. They can find the worldly answers anywhere. Just Google it. Some of them are learning them in school. It's also going to take an understanding of science in order to give them that alternative answer. And if science wasn't your thing in school, that is okay. The rest of this talk, and the reason we go to churches and visit and talk about this, is to share with you that learning some basic scientific concepts is not difficult, and you can apply them to all those questions that we asked at the very beginning of the slides. So, I've used the word science a lot. Let's talk a little bit more about what that means. So the science you were probably taught in school is observational science. It occurs in the present, it's observable, it's repeatable, it's testable. So this is the science where you make an observation about the world around you, you form a hypothesis to explain what you see, you design an experiment to test the hypothesis, conduct the experiment, collect data, analyze it, write a report, summarize things, and the whole process can repeat itself. This is the science that's given us tremendous medical advances in the last 100 years. It's put men on the moon. It's given you all the cell phones that are distracting you in your pocket right now, right? Observational science, operational science, another way to describe it. It's great. Historical science, on the other hand, by the nature of its name, occurs in the past. It's unobservable. It's a one-off. It's not repeatable. You can't test it. Evolution and creation are forms of historical science. It's not the same thing as what I described with observational. So for the purposes of this afternoon, when I say evolution, I'm referring to an account of our origin. How did we get here? It is an account of our origin, but it's from molecules to man over long periods of time. In a nutshell, that's evolution. When I say creation, I'm also referring to an account of our origin. How did we get here? But it's as plainly written in the book of Genesis. And those two things, no matter which view you have, there may be people here today that we have opposing views, and that's okay. But no matter which view you have, they both can't be right at the same time. We can at least agree on that. They both could be wrong, but they both can't be right. And I want to know, and this is what I did when I was working my PhD, and someone started talking about this in one of the classes and gave a presentation. I was like, wait a minute. Okay, they both can't be right, so which one is it? And I spent a long time for myself sorting through things. And I'm by no means an expert in every single area of this. But it's important to come to that point and say, well, all right, well, which one am I going to believe and why? So it's important to understand the distinction and the issues with historical science before we go any further. And the easiest way that I can describe it is this is how it plays out. Can you see what the two men are fighting over? Just yell it out if you can pick it out on the screen. A fossil. Okay, they're fighting over a fossil. We've got a creationist on one side, evolutionists on the other. They're fighting over a fossil. Now, does the fossil exist in the past or the present? You're hearing both, right? We get past and present. And every place I go and ask this question, even the other speakers, same thing. We get sort of the popcorn answer of both. Well, the fossil exists, even though that's a cartoon, the fossil exists in the present. But we make interpretations about the past based on the evidence that's in front of us. And we have been conditioned to even hear the word fossil and think millions of years. That's what is all around us. So who has the most evidence then? Creationist or evolutionist? Or maybe it's the biologist or the astronomer. Maybe it's the geologist. They all have the same evidence. They're just making different interpretations about it. An easier way to think of it is like two lawyers battling it out in a courtroom. A few chuckles, that means some of you have watched 1980s TV. If you haven't, it's okay. I tried the reruns, and it's not as good as I remembered. But for those of you that don't know who that is, that's Andy Griffith, Matlock. In the 80s, I loved this show. Absolutely. I was going to be a lawyer for probably 3-4 years because I just loved this show. And this is what happened. 1980s fictional TV. In the last 5 minutes of every show, the prosecutor would stand up and say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence that's before you clearly shows that the defendant is guilty as charged. You must find him. Once in a while it was her, but it was 1980s TV, so it was a little bit sexist. You must find him guilty as charged. And then Matlock stands up, he's the defense lawyer, rumpled suit, southern drawl, and says the exact opposite. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence before you clearly shows that my client is innocent of all charges and you must acquit him or her. What do you think happened? Every single week, 1980s fictional TV. Matlock won. And I wanted to be a lawyer because I thought I would be Matlock. I never once thought I'd be the prosecutor and lose every time. Matlock had the truth on his side every single week. Well, as Christians, we need to remember, and sometimes we forget, I think, we need to remember the truth is always on our side too, in real life. And where do we go for truth? Go to the Bible. So where do we go for truth about our origins? First book of the Bible. We go to Genesis. And unfortunately, even in churches today, people will say things like this. Well, there's many ways to interpret it. It's just a side issue. It's not that important. Let's just move on to the important doctrines. But it does matter. Think back a few slides ago, all those teens that are walking away from their faith because they didn't have a proper understanding of their origin. They didn't have a proper understanding of Genesis. Genesis can't be removed from the Bible. It can't be ignored in the Bible. This might seem like a weird thing to say, and I know this is kind of an ugly slide. The only thing I really need you to see are the fact that there are a bunch of words on top and bottom and a bunch of red lines and blue lines. The words are the 66 books of the Bible listed from left to right, top and bottom, Genesis through to Revelation. The blue lines represent cross-references from books of the Old Testament to other books of the Bible, kind of linkages. The red lines represent cross-references from books of the New Testament to other books of the Bible, new and old. And they crisscross. There's over 2,800 different cross-references in the Bible. It means that it's intricately connected. And even though there's parts of the Bible that I don't like, I can't pick and choose the stuff that I don't want in there. I didn't write it. With respect to Genesis, there's over 100 different references to Genesis in the New Testament. 60 of those references go to the first 11 chapters of Genesis, which are the key account of our origin, right? The creation, the fall, Noah's flood, all of that. And Jesus himself referred to those first 11 chapters 16 different times in his ministry. So how many times does it take for us to go, might be something here? Now, in addition to being gifted in sarcasm, I'm also gifted in skepticism. And so I would ask this question 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I would have asked this question differently. Well, what if I don't take it literally? What if I don't believe it? I can still believe in the Bible, but what if I don't take a literal Genesis? Well, if Genesis is not real, literal history with a literal, very good creation and a literal Adam and Eve, then sin didn't literally enter the world through their actions, and you and I do not literally need to be saved from anything. Now, I just met you guys, but I know you sin. I do. You didn't have to meet me to know that. And if you've ever hung around a 2-year-old for any length of time, you don't have to teach them to do the wrong thing. They just know. It's an easy thing for us to say, I've fallen short of God's standard. Whether you believe God's standard or not is a little bit different. But if you read what it is, everybody can say, yeah, I don't meet that standard. And that's all this is saying. Why don't I meet that standard? Well, Genesis has the answer for that. Genesis also answers these 3 questions. And everybody has asked themselves these questions at one point in time in their life. Maybe not in this order and maybe not in this exact wording, but where did I come from? What is my purpose in life? Why are we here? And what happens when I die? Those 3 questions everybody's asked. Interestingly, how you answer the first one will dictate your answer from the other 2. And Genesis provides those. So ultimately, everything that I've been sharing so far this afternoon really comes down to it's a worldview issue. And so we have 2 competing worldviews, and it's important to look at, and for just one perspective, to highlight the difference between them. Let's look at the timelines. So we have the biblical timeline, 3 key events: creation about 6,000 years ago, Noah's flood about 4,500 years ago, Jesus coming on the scene 2,000 years ago. But we came at the beginning of that, day 6. That's when first humans, Adam and Eve. And I didn't create this timeline. It came from the Bible. Those places that our eyes kind of glaze over and we can't pronounce all the names, and it lists the genealogies, but in some places it'll say this was the lifespan. And so was this old when their son was born, and then their son lived this long. Well, people have put those together, a process called developing a chronogenealogy, and you go to creation.com for more information on that. But I didn't create it, is my point. The Bible speaks to this. And when you put all of that together, that's where you get the biblical timeline. And if you've been a part of the church or you've been participating in this church, or you know a little bit about the Bible, anything I've said so far is not new. I mean, you probably knew it, you know it. The question that is important to ask is, do you believe it? Right? Would you go on your social media page and say, yeah, I believe God created everything by speaking it into existence in 6 days? That on the 6th day he created a man called Adam and a woman called Eve. And about 1,500 years later, he got tired of humanity and he wiped everybody out except one family. It took me a long time to be able to say that. So I had to unlearn a lot in my late 20s before I would be willing to say publicly that I believe that. So I understand the difficulty and the challenge associated with unlearning something and learning something new. If you've believed this from the day you were born or all the way through, I'm jealous. It's not the case for a lot of people. It's possible that you subscribe to the evolutionary timeline, or you have family members that do, or you have friends that do. Well, that timeline is drastically different, right? 13.7 billion years ago for the Big Bang, Earth being formed or coming into existence 4.5 billion years ago, first life 3 billion years ago. The point is with this is that humans in the scale of things came at the end of that, 300, 400,000 years ago. And as I said before, both of these views can't be right at the same time. So where does truth come from? Well, if we look at, again, another comparison of these two, we've got humanism, that worldview. The trunk of that view is evolution, and it is rooted in man's truth. That is where this view came from. Man developed it a couple hundred years ago. Or Christianity, Christian worldview, the trunk is creation. It is rooted in the Bible, where God's word decides truth. And you know what's happening in our culture and in our society today, and you can see the fruit that's produced from that view. Well, I'll pick the fruit from the tree of Christianity any day over that. If God is our creator and we are his creation, then he has the right to tell us right from wrong. He has the right to tell us what's true and what's not. There's lots of things, I admitted before, lots of things in the Bible that I wish weren't there, and I think my life would be better if I didn't have to follow it. But it's not up to me, and it's not up to you. It's not up to any of us. And then if man is instead the production of millions of years of evolution and random chance, you can see from this image, you can see the fruit that's produced, and you can just go out into the world and see it for yourself. So when you ask a question, do you want the right answer or do you want the wrong answer? Unless you're that sarcastic kid in the back of the class, you want the right answer. And what we're going to do in order to show you where and how you can find truth for your family is we're going to apply all the concepts we've just talked about. Operational science, historical science, what you know to be true from the Bible, understanding of a biblical worldview, and we're going to apply it to just two basic questions, two of the ones that were on the screen at the beginning. First, did God literally make the universe and everything in it in 6 days? The reason I start with this one is that this was so hard for me to get to and to believe. I was trying to do both in my head. I had the Sunday school box, and when I was around Christians, I knew what to say. And when I was in front of my teacher or I wanted an A on a test, I knew exactly what to say. But I never, for a long time, ever tried to say, well, what do I really believe? Well, I believe that God did literally make the universe and everything in it in 6 days. And we'll go through some of the evidence for that. Essentially, the debate, if you want to call it a debate, is did God really create the heavens and the earth on day one? Did he separate the waters, creating an expanse on day 2? Did he create dry land or cause it to appear on day 3? Did he place the sun, the moon, and the stars in the sky on day 4? Did he create the birds of the air and the fish of the sea on day 5? And lastly, did he create all land creatures, including us and dinosaurs, on day 6? Did he do that? Well, some people, even within church, will say things like each day of creation represents millions of years. Has anybody heard that view? All right. This verse, 2 Peter 3:8, is often used to say, see, a day can be a long period of time. The Bible is saying it's like 1,000, so it could be 1,000,000. So the verse itself says, with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. And they say, see, aha, it's settled. It's long periods of time. The problem is that verse, that passage, is not talking about creation at all. Scoffers were saying, where is his coming? When is Christ coming back? and we don't know. This verse is talking about the patience of God, that he is not willing for anyone to perish. God is outside of time. This verse is not the verse to use to define what the word day is. And even if you hold on to that a little bit, or you don't want to give it up, you have to reconcile all the other times when it plainly is saying a day, like we normally think of as a day. And so here's another really plain example. Exodus 20:11. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh. Did God rest for millions of years? No, that's not it. So did he literally do this in 6 days? The Bible clearly says he did. Do you know the only place that we as people challenge the use of the word day is in Genesis chapter 1. All the other places in the Bible where it's used the same way, we accept as an ordinary 24-hour day. But Genesis chapter 1, this is where people insert millions of years into that. So verse 5, 8, 13, 19, 23, and 31 all have a key phrase. There was evening and morning, one day. There was evening and morning, a second day. There was evening and morning, a third day. There was evening and morning, a fourth day. There was evening and morning, a fifth day. And there was evening and morning, a sixth day. All the other places in the Bible where it's used in that same way, we take it to mean an ordinary day. 523 times we take it to mean an ordinary day. So why only question Genesis chapter 1? That's not fair. It doesn't really make sense. Now, I know why it's done. The reason we question only Genesis is because of the long time view that came into our culture, society, a couple hundred years ago. If you go to any national park kiosk and you read, one or two of them, somewhere in there, all the ones I've been to, they all have some kind of a description of the geology that you see. And every single one of them talk about how this was created, this came to be or was formed X number of millions of years ago or billions of years. And I just went to the National Park Service website. I know it's pretty small on the screen, so let me read it just so you get the full sense. Geologists start counting geologic time from Earth's surface downward. That is, they start with younger superficial deposits descending into older rocks and deeper time. Geologists count back more than 4 billion years to the oldest Earth materials. Astronomers help geologists count even further back to the time of Earth's formation, which may seem somewhat arbitrary because the Earth did not appear instantaneously as a planet in space. Nevertheless, this moment may be defined as when the Earth achieved its present mass. Scientific calculations presently place this event at over 4.6 billion years ago. And it's just presented to us as fact. And I never questioned it before. I just went, yeah, whatever. Okay, and move on. How many of you were taught this view in school? That was me. I mean, yeah. And I put all those answers down on the page because I wanted to get a good grade in the class. I accepted it because the teacher said it, but to be quite honest, I never really thought about whether I believed it or not. So where did that long time view come from? I mean, when you look at the Grand Canyon, at least I'll speak for me, when I look at the Grand Canyon, I still look at it and go, millions of years. Oh, no, wait a minute. No, that's not what I believe. It was so ingrained in my thought process. We need to remember, though, that rocks and fossils do not come with dates attached. It's interpretation through the worldview of the scientist. And in Evolution's Achilles' Heels, Dr. Taz Walker says that geologic record, that the word record is a misleading term. It's based on pre-existing assumptions and used when interpreting rock layers. It gives the impression, that word record gives the impression that rocks and fossils are ordered and can be read like a historical document to provide a valid history. So where did the long ages come from? When did this start? Let's go back and look, 1600s, late 1500s, all the way up through. You probably recognize Darwin on the far right, but the other scientists, do you know them? We have Kepler, Nicholas Steno, Isaac Newton, everyone's heard of him. A lot of these men, they may not believe every single thing that we believe about the Bible, but they were much closer to us than they were to Darwin. Nicholas Steno in particular, he attributed bones in rock, he found bones in rocks, and he attributed those to be shark teeth from Noah's flood. I mean, that was his worldview. That's where he was. Darwin didn't invent this long time period either. It actually started with James Hutton and Charles Lyell. Lyell was the one who really pushed this forward. He was a lawyer, and he was very good at convincing people of things. James Hutton wrote The Theory of the Earth, and Charles Lyell took that and added to it in a publication called Principles of Geology. And essentially, Darwin then borrowed their ideas of long time and used that to apply it to biological evolution. And it's that view of long ages that even gives biological evolution even an air of plausibility. And it's all based on the principle of uniformitarianism. They looked at geological processes that were happening, currently happening, slow and gradual, and they extrapolated them to say, well, if it continued like that forever, or has always been like that, then everything would have to be this old. And they, in simple terms, they applied that across the board. Were they successful? Wildly successful in the last couple hundred years. Richard Dawkins, you probably know at least the name. He's kind of the new atheist. But these men were very successful, and all of this information is in front of our kids, just at the drop of a hat. And it's just taught as fact. So it's not really taught. It's assumed as fact, and everything else is built on it. We know they were successful because kids are walking away from their faith because they don't have that proper understanding. So let's go back to the Grand Canyon, and let's look at that question of, if Genesis is truly 6 literal days, the world is only 6,000 years, how do we reconcile millions of years in examples like the Grand Canyon? Now, I'm going to get into some semi-technical things in the next few slides, but these two statements are really the crux of what you need to remember from this part. How do we reconcile the millions of years with 6,000? Chapter 5 in that book, Evolution's Achilles' Heels. First statement is, not all geological processes or features can be interpreted through slow and gradual processes. Not everything makes sense through slow and gradual processes of things that we see. I'm referring here to flat gaps, polystrate fossils, all the way down through to things in coal deposits. So there's a lot of evidence to support that one statement. The flip side is, many geological features do not require long periods of time to develop. We're talking about finely layered sediments, formation of canyons, formation of rocks, fossils, even coal and diamonds. And so what's left in white? Finely layered sediment, canyons, rock, and fossils. In the next few slides, I'm going to give you some examples, and I'm going to use one particular thing that's happened in a lot of our lifetime as a case study to demonstrate that many geological features do not require long periods of time to develop. And the case study I'm going to use, the one that we often use in this case, is Mount St. Helens. And the reason is that it was observed. And it happened in a lot of our lifetimes. And if it wasn't, there's lots of recordings of it. Right? You can go back and see it. Now, we can't go back and redo it, but we can see the effect. If you're not familiar with what happened, an earthquake caused the north side of the mountain to slide away. This was on May 18th, 1980. It caused an eruption of steam and gas that exploded northward towards Spirit Lake. And the initial eruption lasted 9 hours on May 18th, 1980. It actually blew lumps of rock over 6 miles from the blast site. So it was a powerful, powerful volcanic eruption. What happened? Well, the geology, the landscape changed forever. Totally changed, almost overnight. And here's an example of that. So this first layer, you can see hopefully 3 distinct layers here. The first one was basically the airfall material on the afternoon of the initial eruption. Think of ash settling out. But that second one, there was another eruption about a month later, June 12th. And all of that material, and you can see the layers, finely layered sediment, all of that happened in 3 hours. The sedimentary layers alternate between light and dark, 22 feet of finely layered sediment. And if I didn't tell you, if you didn't believe me, if I just showed you that and I said it was millions of years, that would match with everything else that we see and are told. But we know when it happened, 3 hours. And then that top section, there was a mud flow in 1982 that laid down another event. So if one little, in quotation marks, one little volcano could do this in what amounts to a matter of hours, try to imagine what would have happened during the flood with a whole year of volcanic, seismic activity and everything else associated with it. Try to imagine what the global flood would do in 1 year if this happened in just a few hours. It's hard for us to imagine, but that's the creationist model. Now, how about canyon formation? We've all been taught to interpret this as slow erosion over millions of years. There's a little bit of water. Colorado River carved the Grand Canyon over millions of years. A little bit of water over a long period of time. Well, if we go back to Mount St. Helens and we look at an area that is coined or is called the Little Grand Canyon, it's about a 40th the size, it was formed in 1 day. That mud flow that ripped through the valley on March 19th, 1982, went through about 40 miles an hour. It carved the Little Grand Canyon in 1 day. And those head walls are about 140 feet tall in some cases. So it was the exact opposite of a little bit of water over a long period of time. It was a lot of water over a little bit of time that caused that. And we know it. It was observed. So if we go back to, so we're talking about finely layered sediment, talk about formation of canyons. Let's look at rock formation as well. As I said before, rocks and fossils don't come with dates attached, but we can use Mount St. Helens as another example. A few years later, after the eruption, a lava plug formed at the top of the volcano, and scientists took, or geologists took a sample of that rock and sent it away for radiometric dating. Potassium argon was the procedure or method they used. The whole rock came back with a date of 350,000 years, with some of the elements inside giving a range of 900,000 to 2.8 million years. But we know the rock was less than 10 years old because we know when it formed. So if you can't trust the radiometric date for when you actually know and have a sample, how can you trust it when you're not sure? And there's all kinds of examples of this. I'm just using Mount St. Helens. There's lots of them. If this topic interests you, then go to creation.com. There's some books out on the table that deal a lot with geology and give more detail than what I'm able to do in one presentation. So I may not have convinced you totally that God created and made everything in the universe in just 6 days. I may not have given you enough information to share with someone who doesn't believe it, if you do. But I hope you can say and realize, there's some things I hadn't thought about before. Or I can use that in a discussion with someone else. So let's continue that same approach with how are fossils made. So if there was a worldwide flood, what evidence would you expect there to be? What would you expect to find? My guess is you would expect to find billions of dead things buried in rock layers all over the world. And that's exactly what we find all over the world. Billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water, everywhere. There's places in North America. There's places around the world too, but places in North America that are called dinosaur mega bone beds. And we're talking about areas like a square mile of a jumbled mess of marine animals, fossilized with land animals, dinosaur bones. Everything's all just tumbled together. You guys would be familiar area-wise. Picture something like that just in the middle of Kansas. I don't know if there are any in Kansas. The one I'm going to show you is actually in Canada, but it's in the middle of the country. When I do some of these on the East Coast, and I talk about geography, and they're used to seeing the ocean or smelling it, being very close to it. There's no big water body around here to have the marine animals. This particular bone bed I'm talking about is in the middle of Alberta, or the middle of Canada, right in the border with Alberta and Saskatchewan. Just under a square mile. The explanation that secular geologists or paleontologists would give is that a local flood caused it. But these are huge creatures, and they could just avoid it. And how would all the marine creatures be buried with them at the same time? It's good evidence to give someone a pause for thought, and there's lots of those bone beds around. So let's look at how fossils are formed in the first place. That was the evidence of what we see. Well, how did it get there? How can we explain how it got there? Think back to those layers. We've all heard that rock layers may take thousands of years, millions of years to form. That's one, even though we showed with Mount St. Helens that's not the case. But how many of you also been told and taught that it takes millions of years for fossils to form? That was what I learned at school. This was kind of the model, right? Mountains erode, an organism dies, sinks to the bottom of a water body, slowly buried over time, and even slower still, the fossilization process takes place. Eventually it's discovered. The problem with that model is when I go swimming in the ocean, I don't see a lot of dead things on the bottom, right? And initially, when things die, a lot of times they float. They're picked at by scavengers. So the slow and gradual doesn't work for the burial side very well, at least not for the level of detail that we see in the fossil record. And then from operational experiment side of things, a dead pig was placed in deep waters in the Straits of Georgia near the west coast of Canada. Very cold water, so wouldn't have been as much degradation of the organism under very low oxygen levels. In 7 days, that's what it looked like. Notice how scattered the bones are. Most of that decomposition was by marine scavengers. Try to imagine creating a fossil that we see at the level of detail we see, if that's supposed to be there for 1,000 years, 100 years. I don't know what it would look like even after 10. This was 7 days later. No, I need a cartoon image to demonstrate the model of what we feel makes more sense. Happy, smiling fish, life is great. Scared fish, some event happens, sedimentation. Buried, low oxygen, no predation. And then you have the fossilization process. And the level of detail that we see in the fossil record speaks to rapid burial. I already shared with you the info bite that had 257 fish swimming in formation. Rapid burial makes a whole lot more sense for that. We'll try this one. Female ichthyosaur, fossilized while giving birth. Okay, the level of detail speaks to rapid burial for that. And it doesn't have to take a long period of time for fossils to form. This was published in Paleontology, an online journal, 2018. Summary of their paper is titled, "Researchers have discovered how to make proper fossils in 1 day." It says they figured out a way by compressing that incredibly lengthy time into just 1 day. So it highlights the need for rapid burial followed by high pressure and temperature. Does not require long periods of time for the fossilization process under the right conditions. We have an example here of a felt hat that was buried in volcanic ash, and less than 20 years later, It had been permineralized, so you may say it quickly evolved into a hard hat. So I've given you a couple of things in each one of these questions, and there's a whole lot more information in them, right? If I were you 20 years ago, I'd be sitting in the back for sure, and I would say, well, so what? I'm still not really that convinced. Why does any of this matter? In order to look at why it matters, it's important to go back to the Garden of Eden for a couple of minutes as I close, because the Bible describes a perfect paradise. In fact, what did God say about his creation on the sixth day? He said it was very good. And it was very good until sin entered the world through Adam's actions. Now, is sin, death, disease, suffering, are they very good things? No. All of us know someone that has suffered or is suffering with cancer, just as one disease. We would not call that very good. But if you subscribe to the millions of years view and you're trying to marry that and merge that into the Bible, that means your Garden of Eden is resting on millions of years of death, disease, and suffering. God did not call that very good. We just said we wouldn't call those things very good. God certainly wouldn't call it very good because he created something that was very good before death, disease, and suffering, before sin entered the world. Now, unfortunately, Adam messed it up for us, right? God even gave him a warning. Genesis 2, verses 16 through 17. And God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden. Knock yourself out. It's all yours. Except you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly or you will surely die. He gave him a warning. And he ignored it. He gave him the free choice, and he ignored it. Unfortunately for us, because he ignored it, we've inherited that sin nature. Like I said, you don't have to teach a 2-year-old to do the wrong thing. We spend their whole life trying to teach them to do it the right way. Romans 5:12, the Apostle Paul says, therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man and death through sin, in this way death came to all because all sinned. God's righteousness, his perfection, demands a penalty for sin, and he decided the penalty for sin was death, separation from him forever. But that's not the end of the story. He also designed a rescue mission from the very beginning featuring his son so that we too could be viewed as righteous through belief and faith in Jesus. And in Revelation 21:4, it says, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning, crying, or pain. And every one of us is looking forward to that time when there's no more mourning, no more death, no more crying. I am. But unfortunately for us, we don't live at the time that they're speaking of right there. We live now, when there is death, disease, suffering, tears, crying. We can't avoid that. And we serve a loving and a just God. He's shown us the way out, but we are still in that battle. And it really is a battle. There's a battle going on for the souls of men, women, and children all around the world, the United States, Kansas, Wichita, and here in this church this afternoon. At CMI, our goal is to provide you with credible answers that prepare you for that battle. And our most effective tool is Creation Magazine. And in a few minutes, not quite yet, but in a few minutes, I'm going to give you an opportunity to sign up for the magazine as well. It's our most effective outreach tool in this battle that we're in. It's been published over 45 years. It comes out quarterly. There's no ads in it. It's just article, 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 from cover to cover, 56 pages, 4 times a year. And if you subscribe to it today, you'll get that first issue today for, well, it's not free, you're paying for that one, but you'll get the issue as you leave. But you'll also get something that is free, and that's a digital version that you can share with your loved ones. So you can send that digital version to your kids, and they can have it on their iPhones. They can have it on their tablets. You're only supposed to share it with up to 5 people, but if you turn the video off for a second, share it with as many people as you want, right? We want people to get it. You can also take an article and just send an article to somebody. So you may not have to have all the answers to the questions that people ask in the moment they ask them, but it's also acceptable to say, I know there is one for that. Let me send you something. I just read an article the other day. I'll send it to you, and then let's get coffee next week and see what you think. That is an answer to people's questions. So if you sign up today for the 1-year subscription, you'll get that first issue and the digital version to share. If you do the 2-year subscription, I want to give you 2 additional gifts. The first one is a Darwin documentary, a DVD that a number of years ago we retraced Darwin's steps on the voyage of the Beagle, asking the question, if he were alive today, if he knew what we know, would he still be an evolutionist? And we'll also give you the DVD called Fallout, where you can hear firsthand why students are walking away from their faith. So when the clipboard or the sign-up sheets are passed around, you have the opportunity to select 1 or 2-year. Obviously, I subliminally suggest 2. But when you fill it out, make sure to put your email address clear, because that's the only way we can give you the digital version to share. Make sense? And when that comes to you, it's different than the sign-up sheet for the newsletter. There's perforated edges on the sign-up sheet. Tear that off and bring it to the book table so we can process payment and give you the gifts. That's the only difference with that, if you feel led to sign up. So if you guys want to pass those out now, that'd be great. And I'll just wrap up with answering a few of the basic questions that folks ask. I'll give you a kind of an insight into what the magazine is and some examples of it. This particular lady, 99 years old, used it to preach. It's really an evangelism tool, okay? And here's some examples of articles. This is my favorite one. These 2 girls are twins. They have the same mother and father. Now, race is a hot topic in our country today, but the Bible has answers for this. It's life-changing information. The Bible can explain where race has come from. I've already shared with you the ichthyosaur that was fossilized while giving birth. But here's one from a relatively recent magazine or article. This breed of donkey is quite rare, critically endangered, only 200 or so remaining in the world. Look at the stripes on its legs. We should not be surprised that donkeys, horses, and zebras can all interbreed. They're the same biblical kind. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next presentation after the break. I'll also go into a little more detail on dinosaurs and soft tissue and red blood cells that have been found. But we've published this in several Creation magazine articles. Red blood cells found in dinosaur bones. I didn't know this when I was going to school. It was happening at that time, but I wasn't taught it. It might have actually changed my mind, because there's no way that you can have soft tissue, red blood cells in dinosaur bones that are thought to be at least 65 million years old. It just doesn't make sense. Even the scientist that's credited with the findings said it was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. Of course, I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones are, after all, 65 million years old. Why couldn't she believe it? Her worldview was locked in that way. She's asking the right question. How could blood cells survive that long? But she's not looking in the right place for the answer. And speaking of answers, if this is new, right, this is the first time you've heard a presentation like this, you haven't delved into the topic very much at all, and you're interested in learning more, there's a red book on the book table. It's called the Creation Answers book. 60 of the most common questions that people ask are answered in that book. There's enough detail to satisfy your curiosity, but there's also some reference material and some footnotes and passages where you can go to dig and find more. But it's a great introductory book to all of the common questions. And we've got it grouped into a creation intro pack as well. If you've got a student heading off to college, university, I would recommend the Creation Survival Guide. I think there are some in that on the book table as well. Or maybe you want to dive into a very detailed commentary on the Genesis account, the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Very well done. Think commentary, and what Dr. Safety has done is fantastic there. If you're also interested in touring Egypt with CMI, there's a trip coming up in 2025. You can find more information on our website for that. So I'm going to leave with, or end this particular section with, I hope you were able to engage your mind as a form of worship. And I want you to think through that way as we go into the next session, because the Bible does tell us we need to be prepared. And as I said before, being prepared doesn't mean you have to be an expert in every single one of those topics. You'll find out when we do the question and answer period that my most common answer is, I don't know. I don't have every answer to every question that you guys are going to ask this afternoon. But I can point you to where and how you can find the answer. And more times than not, it's not a quick answer that draws someone into this. It's a long period of time, lots of cups of coffee, discussion, back and forth, and it's worth the investment of the time. If you have a loved one or a friend that is kind of wrestling with this, it's not just going to be one answer that does it, okay? So I will end it here. I know we're a little bit over in the time, but we'll make it up in the next one. We'll take a break. How long do you guys want to take a break for? 10 minutes? All right. He wants 10 minutes. And then we'll come back. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in a few minutes.